And thank you for our organization that we've put together here to try to document the history of Campbellsville, and we especially thank you for all the people that have been around here for 80 some odd years that are still around, that we can here to share their memories with us. And we just ask that everything we do here be pleasing in your sight. In Jesus Christ's name we'll pray. Amen.
Can I add something real fast?
Sure.
I want everybody to make sure they get some refreshments too, so make sure you get something.
All right, I'm told that refreshments are available anytime back there, so this is going to be real informal. Y'all just feel like you're at home, and if you want to complain, well, that'll be all right too. But just go back and have some refreshments, and just make yourselves right at home here. Christy Henson. Christy's the girl in the back with the green T-shirt on. She's the chairperson of our membership committee. Any of you who would be interested in memberships, why, you can see her, and she may have a word or two to say to us here in a few minutes. Again, the refreshments are available back there at any time. On your calendars, keep May 19th open, if you will. May 19th is a tentative date for our Battle of Campbellsville Civil War Trails marker dedication. Now, we can't officially announce that until the state has told us when they're going to have it in, but we hope that's done by the 19th. So that's a tentative date for right now, but try to keep that date open. Christy, do you want to say a few words? And then after Christy, we're going to turn the program over to Claudia Johnson-Nichols, who is our program chairperson, and she'll fill you in on what's going on here. Thank you.
I just want to say, if anybody wants to join, we have applications today, and if you're here and you're not, we'd appreciate it if you just fill out an index card and give us your information, just so we can know you were here. So everybody doesn't care.
Start the cards.
I will.
And by the way, now on the membership dues, now it's less than a penny and a half a day, so that's less than 10 cents a week. So we'd be glad to have you.
That's not like a bargain. That was the same thing.
Today is a day that we're honoring the people who we're lucky enough to have still in our community, who are willing to talk and let us videotape them talking about Campbellsville and their memories, and taking questions from the audience and just sharing some things. We have a few pictures that we'll share at the end and have some discussion about that's pertinent to the people that are in the pictures. So basically we're going to take questions from the audience, and then these ladies and gentlemen are going to answer those questions, and we're going to get each person to tell us who they are. Most of you probably know who each person is that's up here. Before we get started, I wanted to let you know the foundation, the association designed a map that's a historic driving tour of the community, and we have printed some just to show. We're hoping for a sponsorship on this at some point to have them printed and available all the time, but we brought some samples, so if you're interested, it shows some of the spots that history happened and a little bit about those things, and it just gives people a reason to stay in our community and wander around a little bit, or maybe welcome guests to the community. So I'll have those over there at the end of the program. But right now, David, if you want to take the mic and let each person introduce themselves, then folks who are taping will start taping. And
I'm Dean Dickey, and I graduated from Campbellsville High School in 1951. My family and I now live in Columbia, Tennessee. And I'd just like to congratulate Morris and David and Rosemary and all the folks who have kept this going. When George Russell passed away, I just kind of thought, well, there it goes. But anyway, I congratulate you on keeping this going.
I'm Thomas Walls. Sorry. Did you hear me? Along with Dean, I graduated in 1951. We had a big class of 13 people. We had 5 boys and whatever, 8 girls. But I don't know what happened when we was in 7th and 8th grade with Mrs. Sanders. We had about, what, Dean, about 30 something. But I don't know whether they died or went AWOL or what happened to them. But we finished school with 13 in 1951.
Go ahead, Ms. Hamlet.
I'm Joyce Hamlet Godwin, and I graduated in 1947, and I've lived at Campbellsville ever since I was in the 4th grade, and I'm 84 in May, and I love Campbellsville. It's home.
This next lady's been away for a while, but she's back. This is my Aunt Margaret.
Is it a requirement we tell our age?
Only if you're proud of it.
Well, I ain't proud of it. But anyway, I graduated in 1943. Many in my class left in 43 except the girls, because the boys had been drafted or they had had to go to farming to stay at home and, do things and raise crops that they needed in service and around the country. And as I said, I've been away from here a long time. I lived in Florida 27 years, and I came back here I came back to Pulaski in November. So I'm going to stay there now. I'll be around this
You ought
club.
to just move on back out here to camp.
That's right.
Well, that might be a good idea. I don't know whether it'll work out. You might be ashamed of me if I come up here to live. Because I can get honorary sometime, because she's my sister. And I was Margaret Carter. My daddy drove a school bus. Okay, that's all.
This next lady's rather special to me.
Well, I'm Ruth Donovan, and I was Ruth Carden, and we moved to Campbellsville in '36. And I've been here ever since, and I don't guess they'll ever get rid of me until they take me over to Maplewood, because it's a good place to live, and I've certainly enjoyed it. And I'm 82 today, but now tomorrow I'm going to be 83. So if you want to know how old I am, I'm proud of every day of it, and I just enjoy being with this group, and we hope that we can continue it on. We have some good leaders, and I think we can with all of us' help. Thank you.
Don't many of you know this fella probably, but
I'm Mark Donovan. I've lived here and in the Army and off at school for 85 years and 10 months. And I would have graduated from Campbellsville in 1944 if I'd have graduated, but I did somewhere else. I graduated from Morgan Prep School at Petersburg, but I was a class of 44. What else you want me to say?
you hadn't lived all your life here yet, have you?
No.
Not yet.
I'm Christine Morris, and I was born here and stayed here, and right over here where Connie lives now. That's where I was born. There was a family of 8 of us, and all of them were born there except one. And she was born on Old Home Place in Middle Branch. Well, I stayed here and finished school in 41. And I think I was about 16 or 17 when we moved to Middle Branch. And my dad lived about a couple of years when we moved down there, and then he died suddenly. So I have been around. I can tell you a lot about Campbellsville. Some of it you might not want to hear. But anyway, I have, my roots are here, and I love Campbellsville. And I have lived, now I'm living in Wales. My husband is deceased and I live by myself. But other than living in Wales and here, and then he was in service, I lived in California 3 years. I've been around here. Well, I'm going to say I've been around here 90 years. I just had my 90th birthday, and God's been good to me, and I hope everybody will live as long as I have. I've enjoyed it. You know, that's all, David, I guess.
Okay, what next?
I think the best thing to do at first, I know as they started speaking, you probably thought of things that you would be interested in hearing them say, or some of you are kin to these folks, or know of stories that you want them to tell. I can think of some I want my Uncle Thomas to tell in a minute about the school, because things I heard. But let's do that first. Let's go ahead and get some questions out to them of things you really want to make sure that we get on tape and we get recorded and caught for history. So does anybody have a question they'd like to start with, or a favorite story you heard one of them tell and you'd like to go ahead and get that started? About the school, about the community, about farming, anything like that?
Who'd you say that your eighth grade teacher was?
It's Sanders.
Bertha Sanders. Did she make that class smaller? Was she that mean?
Well, she kept a pole over in the corner of the room.
You see, that was my grandmother.
Well, I didn't say anything too bad, I hope. But when I was in the 7th, well, let me go back a little bit. When I left school at the University of Rose Hill, in the 5th grade, I started at Campbellsville. And I didn't know too many people down here. Charles Tatum and Winford probably more than anybody else. And I was felt like I was intimidated a little bit, because my little bib overalls didn't look as good as them khaki pants on some of the guys. But Miss Sanders, she taught the 7th and the 8th grade. And best I remember is about 60 in that class, which she couldn't teach like that now. I think they have about 20 to a class now. But during the time I was there, if you remember, about a quarter of a mile up here behind the schoolhouse, there was a well digging going on. When they dug the oil well, and they went 6,000 feet. They had a big derrick, they piped water from the creek, had big mud ponds, and they had racks to hold the big drill bits on. But anyway, next thing you know, they had leased all the land around the surrounding area. Then, all of a sudden, they were gone. They plugged a hole and left because they said that the quality of the oil was not sufficient for them to pump it. So Campbellsville was not a boom town. And I guess that...
What year was that?
That was in about the middle 40s.
And where was it?
It's right up here, about 500 yards behind the schoolhouse.
Oh, okay.
And it was, of course, Campbellsville is known for limestone rock.
Right.
I can prove that with Tim. But it was a constant bang, bang, bang. But we lived through it, and they left, so Campbellsville's still here, and it wasn't a boom town.
Would you like to tell the story about when you were helping the janitor at school one time?
Well, David mentioned this morning. Tom Zuccarello was bless his heart, he's gone to meet his master. He was the janitor up at school and lived in this little house down here where Richard Beaver lives. but it wasn't that kind of a house then. He and his mother, and I lived up on High Street. Well, in the afternoons, to try to make a nickel a dime, I'd help Tommy sweep or do whatever it was to clean up. Well, on a Friday night when the basketball games were here, Tommy would have one of his friends, and this particular one was named Happy Emmett. Some of you might know Happy. I don't even know whether he's still living or not. But anyway, we went back in that old science room back there where the tables are, and we had one heck of a racer battle. I was in the back, Tommy was over here, and Happy was up front. Well, we ran out of racers, and everything was quiet. And I raised up to see where they were, and here come a steel folding chair. And I still got a scab on my head from it. So you can imagine, they carried me out behind the schoolhouse and that water fountain, and the water looked like blood pouring off on the ground. But I guess nowadays they call them concussions, but I didn't go to the doctor. I told my aunt I fell off the coal pile.
Thomas, what year was that Rose Hill came to Campbellsville?
What year?
What year did they come to Campbellsville?
Oh, well, in the 5th grade.
When,
you can figure whatever, 40.
I can't figure, I went to Campbellsville.
I remember you.
Oh, well, I've been here. I have been curious to know what year Rose Hill and Libertyville came to Campbellsville.
I don't really know. I came on a family affair. It wasn't at the school.
It wasn't the school that came,
No,
is that
no,
right?
no.
Okay. I'm
Well,
sorry.
when I went to school at Rose Hill, Mrs. Rawson was one of the teachers. Mr. Arlen Chapman, he taught the big room up to the 8th grade.
And who taught you? Who was the lady that was teaching?
Ms. Rawson.
Ms. Rawson taught the little, up to the 5th grade. I'm up to the 4th grade, and Mr. Chapman taught 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th. Well, when I came to Campbellsville, it was not because of school, it was because of family affair.
Okay, I'm sorry, but I had wondered what years those schools came here.
So if I was born in 33 and you add 11 to it, that'd be somewhere around 44, 45.
I think we determined that
Oh, in Liberty Hill, I was in the 5th grade, that'd been about 55, when those kids came in from there, but I'm not sure about those two.
Aunt Wilbur was, she didn't graduate, but she would have graduated in 53, Wilbur Johnson. And she had 11th and what would have been 12th grade, but she got married at Campbellsville School. So that sounds like maybe 50 or 51 or something. It would have been, because she only had 2 years left when they consolidated or came down here.
Okay, I'm sorry, Evelyn.
Well, another thing I'd like to mention, in about 45, 46, up until then, Campbellsville didn't have any indoor plumbing.
I remember that.
Had plenty of 8-party telephones, and that was the community's communication centers with the women folks. They like to keep up with all the gossip. But anyway, they came and built where the boiler room was on the far end. They built the lunchroom and put indoor plumbing. And that did away with the girls was up here on the corner, and it was called, I think, a 6-holder, and the boys down at the gym was a 2-holder. But it got turned over a few times.
I remember going to the toilet one day and wind blew the door to them, and I couldn't get out, and I was hysterical. I was hysterical, and J.R. Deason.
You got locked in there?
Yeah, the door come open. I was wrong.
How old were you?
J.R. Deason come and let me out, which I was thankful.
How old were you?
I was in about the 6th, 7th grade. I was scared. I didn't know what I was going to do.
Do any of y'all remember a time where you didn't have a school bus to come to school? at Campbellsville? I know on Rose Hill you had to walk, but does anybody remember not having a school bus?
Mr. County Oakley had a school bus, but it was his own personal bus.
Did somebody have to pay to ride that bus?
No, and Mr. Cardinal, he drove the bus for how many years, Ruth?
I have no idea. He drove till he was made him quit.
He flopped that door open, he says, "Come up in this kitchen." But talking about what Joyce is talking about, I had an experience at Rose Hill. The girls' restroom, so to speak, was on this corner, and the boys were way down yonder. Well, it came up a windstorm and blew the girls off the hole.
Oh.
And Mr. Abe Smith, that lived off in the hollow there, always had some old hound dogs. Well, it so happened one of these hounds fell in the hole. Mr. Arthur Jones, I know Mark would remember him. He would happen to be there, and he told Mr. We was all kids gathered around there, and he told Mr. Chapman, said, "Arville, we got to get the dog out of there." Okay. So Mr. Arville being a little short guy, we held his feet, and he reached down and got the dog. And the dog just had his head sticking up, you know. You can imagine what was around him. He pulled him up and set him up on the bank, and the dog was The old dog was innocent. He just trotted off down the hill, but I don't know what happened to Mr. Arville.
I have a question for y'all. During World War II, I know, let me move up here where I can look at you. During World War II, when a lot of folks were gone and a lot of, I guess, men in the community were gone, y'all talk to me and talk to the cameras about what it was like during that time, during the time that there was rationing and, you know, concern. I mean, just how did it feel to live through that time period in a small community like this? Ms. Morris, can we start with that?
Okay, we married in October of 41, and my husband was drafted in December when Pearl Harbor was born. They sent he in the National Guard. He was in the National Guard. They sent them to California to guard the coast because they thought the Japs would, be there. So he stayed out there about 3 years. Well, I went out there, and a lot of the girls went out there. We went on a train. We had to go by train. And I left in January and went out there to stay with him. But my daddy was dead then, and my mother was at home by herself with my younger brother, and he was married. But they were rationed. We had little books. I still have books like we had. I still have them. We get so much gas, and then we get so much sugar, and then that's all you get on those, and you were allowed so much person. Well, in 43, when I was out there, our son, Fagan, was born in California. So each person got a book, and when you use that stamp up for gas and sugar, most of the was gas and sugar. Well, that's all you get until you get another book. And nearly all the boys were gone. They had just drafted so many, you know, was in National Guard, and it was a lot of just girls here that husbands were sent somewhere, and it was just real. It was sad, especially to be I'd just gotten out of school and then married, and then Pearl Harbor was bombed. So eventually, that group all left together. That was on the coast, 191st Field Artillery. They sent them all to Germany, and they fought with Patton. And my husband stayed over there 15 months, and they were on the front line. And you wouldn't get your mail. You never knew. Sometimes you'd get 3 or 4 letters at the same time. But you just sit at home and wondered, or wherever you was. Then when they left, I came back with my mother and stayed. And I had a baby then, who was 15 months old. You never knew where they were, and when they wrote, they couldn't tell you much, and it was just sad and a scary feeling. And back then, there was trains. I mean, they traveled by train, and if they got a furlough before they went over there, you know, they would come home, but it would be just a weekend on trains. So that went on until 45, from 41 till 45.
How many of y'all up there had a family member that was gone during World War II? Y'all did?
Ruth did.
And Dean?
Well, Aunt Margaret had a brother and a husband.
Okay. Dean, who did you have over there?
I had a couple uncles, but just thinking back, when Christine mentioned guys leaving, I was probably in the 4th grade. And we always had chapel on Friday morning. But I remember Connie, Jean and Emmett and a guy named Charles Burchell. About 8 or 10 of those folks volunteered to go to we called it the war. But Charles Burchell, he went in the Navy, and a year or so later, Charles was killed in the Navy. Charles's father owned a little convenience store over at I guess the Milky Way Highway between A.M. Sanders Lake and Milky Way there. But anyway, the Cardinal, yeah, I believe he got killed in the war. But all those guys volunteered, and that really made an impact on my life.
I remember when Mr. Jones Shelby had the store down here, and back up what Christine was talking about during the wartime, sugar and gas and lard and coffee, tires, things of that nature. You were lucky if you got a hold of them. Of course, like she said, you were issued stamps and people would share their stamps and this, that, and the other. And Mr. Shelby ran that store, and he kept these, what we call GI cans, galvanized, and under the counter, and that's where he kept his book, white beans and pinto beans. Well, occasionally he would get a carton or two of cigarettes. Well, Mr. Mush and John Lett Smithson over here were some of his favorite customers. And he'd tell them, say, got some cigarettes in today. Well, it so happened that C.L. Coffey was working for the Smithsons, and he happened to hear it. He said, I want a pack of them cigarettes. Mr. Shelby said, don't have any more. He said, yes, you have. He said, I want me some cigarettes. Mr. Shelby knew he meant business, and he'd stick them down in them beans and hide them, you see. But he'd come out with some cigarettes with C.L. Coffey. But there was a lot of things that were rationed that people learned to live with.
Were the books rationed on a monthly basis? I mean, did you receive them monthly or quarterly, and were they delivered by the mail, or?
It wasn't too long. Was it every month or was it?
Month, I believe, a month.
And one funny story during all that time, there was one man that had about 15 children, and he got his stamps, and he told them he couldn't afford to buy that much sugar. He got so many.
Mark, did you receive them through the mail? Or did you have to go somewhere and pick them
We
up?
have to go sign from, we did have to sign.
You had to sign, but once you got it started, then they came. And if you were accustomed to canned blackberries and all of that, you could go, and if that's what you had always done, they'd give you some extra sugar so you could make your jams and jams.
I remember one time, excuse me,
I don't remember
I made a deal, but we didn't have a car.
But you know that, and I want to say another thing, you know, you have never lived through anything like that, but the people were dedicated to the war effort, and there was very little grumbling. People were patriotic, and they didn't fuss and fight about it. They'd go down and try to talk to rationing board, so you could go before the rationing board with a hard case problem. And if they could, they would help you. But people were so patriotic, we wanted Christine to come home.
Mark, I have a question for you. During the time I was researching my book and reading all those old newspapers, your mother was appointed to be the person in this end of the county to deal with a lot of the efforts that were made countywide for collecting scrap metal and collecting all kinds of. Do you have any memory of any of that, how that worked, or? Because there's a lot of stuff with stories with Miss Mary Donovan heading up these efforts.
But the school had, the school children helped in that. I don't know who was responsible for it, but the kids would pick up old plow points. They didn't have any great cars then. Nobody had one. So you got small stuff.
Mark, if you remember, they had an old saying, gathering up scrap to fight the Jap.
Yeah.
Remember that?
Yeah.
But there's one more point that I'd like to make when I was going to school at Roseville, then I'm gonna shut up and let somebody else talk. And to go along with what Mark was saying, people weren't all patriotic, but they were dedicated religiously. They was prayer meetings went on then in homes and churches, and it was a big impact on folks. And like everybody was united, but you don't see that too much anymore. But the point I was gonna make, there was a certain day set aside at Rose Hill School to make mattresses. You remember anything like that, Mark?
Yeah.
Everybody had to furnish their own ticking. That was that stripe stuff. The government furnished the cotton, and everybody had to pull the cotton apart and stuff it in these pickings and make the rolls around the sides, you know, at the top and the bottom. And you could pack it in there and make a pretty good mattress out of it. But those rolls were not all good because that's where the chinches like to hide. Okay.
So how would you get those? I mean, that's just where you.
Well, Mr. Clint Inman, he heard it on WCKY Cincinnati, Ohio, which is an old radio station. They were advertising the surest way in the world to get rid of bed bugs. And he ordered it, COD. Well, it came in a little package. You know what it was? 2 little wooden blocks. The instructions was to lay the bug up there and hit it. He felt like he got ripped off because I think he got $10.
That was good. What I was asking, but that was a good, I like that story, but when, about the mattresses, you said it was set up at Rose Hill?
Yeah.
And was that for a certain area,
That was
or?
that community.
So did we have one down here?
I don't know.
Daddy?
Shoot, that's a long ways off there.
Right, Daddy, or, do y'all remember?
That's Ms. G.
Daddy, do you remember any, he said that happened, that was up there on Rose Hill with the mattresses. Do you know where they made them here in Campbellsville?
I believe they did it to school. I want to believe too.
Well, we didn't get any.
What'd you sleep on?
We didn't get any.
What'd y'all sleep on?
On the bed bugs.
But you didn't, nobody really, I mean, they would help you, but you had to furnish all the labor yourself.
Well, the mattress was a big advantage over straw beds.
Yeah.
I have slept on a straw bed.
Rosemary Grady was wanted everywhere. He was an expert at making mattresses.
Who's Grady?
The black man,
Well, who is Grady?
Grady Campbell, a black man that worked there at home, and he was the son of what we said Uncle Pope Campbell. I don't know what any of you old enough, I don't guess anybody remember. Do you remember Uncle Pope? Well, Uncle Pope raised a family, and somehow several of the children worked, they didn't all work there for my daddy all the time, but if one would be there, and then if he left somewhere else, it'd usually be another one. But Grady was good at doing stuff with his hands. He could shoe a horse. You remember Grady, don't you?
Me?
No, I'm looking at the man over in the corner.
I just know the name. I didn't
But
know.
he would shoe the horses and put up when something was falling down. He was left-handed, slow as Christmas, and could outrun a freight train. And he was so good at making those mattresses when they're going to have one somewhere else. Everybody that could would want Grady to come there.
I'd like to ask Mr. Walls a question, and I don't want you to take the whole session, but this relates to your family. Do you know the story about the little boy that died, that was killed? The little boy, it was a Walls child. He and his brother were playing with a rifle. You know that story, Mark?
Mother knows about it, I think.
That was, Newt and,
It would be, my daddy's sister.
Mr. Donovan's sister.
Okay.
They lived, that's where we lived.
In the little,
No, they lived in the big house.
at the time this happened, where did y'all live then?
We wouldn't have moved up here yet.
Oh,
We lived
yeah.
above the hill.
Okay.
We lived down in God's country.
And they were, what, about 6 or 8 years old?
I have
No.
that,
He was in my class at school.
Yeah.
but they wouldn't, now Connie, you can help me with this, because it's all I know, this is hearsay. But the 2 little boys went squirrel hunting back. And I did know just exactly where it was, but I don't anymore. They changed and moved around back there. But anyway, the one of them accidentally killed the other one. He was buried up here at the cemetery.
Just for folks that know anything about that story, I was in Columbia at Uncle Bob's at the archives in Murray County. And there's a lady that works in there who asked me one time if I knew anything about that, because her mother had been a classmate of the little boy that died. Said she was little bitty, they were like in the 1st grade maybe, and that she remembered when she was in Campbellsville, and they didn't live here long, but that there was this little boy, and he was so nice and would let her borrow his blanket a lot of times when they were taking a nap or whatever. And he came to school every day and was so nice, and then one day he didn't come to school. And she never knew what happened to him. And that's who it was.
He was in my class.
Yeah.
I have it in my book at home, but I don't, I'm afraid to tell anything because I get so.
It was another situation where James Hayes had a son that got killed up here on the school ground. He fell off of a seesaw. Didn't he, Mark?
Yeah. I can't tell you
I
what
don't know
year.
how old he was, but he broke his neck, killed him.
Do any of you know of any other murder or deaths in town during those days, 30s, 40s, 50s? That's the only one I'd ever heard of, was the little boy I was talking about.
Well, my brother, but I don't know what year it was.
How old was he?
I had 2 brothers, C.E. Jr. and William. and he was small. I mean, he wasn't too big, but he wasn't too little. He was crossing the street down here. My daddy let him out to go across the street, the main strip, and a car came by and hit him, and hit his, I don't know if it ran clear over his head, but he had a scar right there all his life.
Was it William?
It's C.E.
C.E.
And then they played football. This is a story too. They played football up there close to where you live now, Mark. That was where they played football. They didn't have any helmets or pads, anything like they have now. But they both were real good football players, especially William. And they played Elton. They went to play Elton. And they beat Elton. And at that time, Elton, they had some rough customers down there.
Yeah, I'm aware of that.
So when Campbellsville football team came off the field, there was a man that just picked up a rail.
Fence rail.
And hit my brother, William, over the shoulder. And fractured his shoulder. Well, when they got back to Campbellsville, a bunch of the men here, it just infuriated. So they wanted to go down there and whip the whole crowd.
The game was at Elton. Campbellsville
Sure
was playing Elton at Elton.
That's right. But they got talked out of it something. They didn't go back down there and whip them all. But my brother, William, got a scholarship to play football at Riverside Military Academy. And I can remember right up here at the house, the coach came and talked to my dad about him going to play football. Well, he did. He signed up, got a scholarship to go to the academy. And when he got out there and he played a few games, his shoulder gave way on him.
The one that he got hurt.
The one that he got hurt. They never did anything or checked his shoulder, but he always hung down like this. So after they found out that he couldn't continue with football, they gave him a scholarship to play baseball. And up here at the old home place, they were shelling corn in a corn show, and he got his finger hung in there when he was small. And this finger right here never did grow like the other one, and it kind of set up. But he changed over, it was his hand, and made a baseball player and pitched with his hand right here. And he was successful in doing it. But that,
What year was that?
you remember, Mark?
I remember it all happening.
I don't remember. I was small because they were quite a bit older than me.
It would be in the 30s. When you think
It
about
wasn't 29?
Huh?
It wasn't 1929?
No. It was later than that.
Later than that.
I would say about 1935.
I think so, about middle. I remember it real well, and they, as I said, they played right up here, Mark, right down in that field.
I think the one that belonged to Caldwell, my uncle Caldwell.
And it was stalks everywhere, and I mean, they just put lines with lime, I guess.
Yeah.
Made the lines, and that's where they played. But the school turned out, and it was a big,
Yeah, that's what Daddy had told me before. Tell them how they picked the fields. You know, when you played football, how would you pick where the field would be?
Well, wherever anybody had a hay field or something and didn't have it in corn or cotton, then they would just look. They played up there toward my house. They played out here where David lived, in that field there he got there. And then they played
Yeah, big dry creek.
2 or 3 places down Dry
Just
Creek.
fields, you know, where the
And over what we said, Water Smith.
Yeah, and over the old ale
Yeah,
place.
played over that Mushy.
So somebody would just go out and look and you could tell which field was good and then they'd go mark it off?
Yeah,
wherever they let them play
Yeah,
it, but they had
the
good
coach,
teams,
the
didn't
coach
they?
would go.
They had good teams.
Yeah, but, you know, who said ale? The ale
The
place?
ale place is
Oh,
what
you
I
the one that
remember.
said that?
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to, that's something that needs to be told here for the history's sake. It was Ale Alexander. It was Albert Alexander, but his daddy was Albert, so there was Ale Alexander and Little Ale. And Little Ale is the one that ate the souse that Cat Yokes' mother had made, and it had already set up poison, and within just a few minutes, Little Ale was dead.
Oh,
Do you remember Lena Ale?
Yeah, I remember Lena Ale.
Lena Ale?
I do too.
Wasn't
She lived right down here.
But wasn't she the meanest woman that ever lived in Tennessee?
She was a tickle,
Yeah.
and she lived right down here,
Right under her house.
I don't want to tell it all, you tell it.
She wasn't chopping the car up.
We always walked to school. I don't remember ever riding to school, but we walked. And there was football down here across this little stream, this, you know, where they've got, well, there's not, the water don't go down there, but it was a foot long. And we walk that foot long and we'd go on to school. Well, we all were scared to death to go by her house. It was right on the side of the road.
He's right here.
And when it was bad and we couldn't walk, well, our dad would carry us in the car. We had cars there, but they rode the horses. But the horses out there. And I don't think they ever had a buggy. I don't remember. But anyway, she got mad at us. That's what you want me to tell you. At her husband one time.
Chopped the car up. Yeah, tell it.
She got mad at him about something and just took her axe, and just chopped his car all to pieces. And she was,
You ladies and I
she had the name of the meanest person that ever was, didn't she, Mama?
I was scared of her, but you know,
We were all
little
scared.
Ale was a distant cousin of mine, and Mama had us calling Lena Ale Cousin Lena. So, Cousin Lena,
We called her Lena.
and I don't know what I ought to tell this about, but when he died, somebody went down to the store and said Little Ale's dead, and Mr. Clyde English was there, and he jumped up and said, I don't care where he went, he's better off.
Dean and I, we were on the same football team. Like he said, we finished in 51. We had, Mark named off some fields, but there was a lot of fields he didn't mention. When we played, we had about 10 on the team. Over at Cox's Bridge and right up here and at Dry Creek, I don't know where else. But anyway, we had a lot of fun. But I guess one of the funniest things, and I'm gonna tell this on Dean, we was playing over at Cox's Bridge, playing Chapel Hill, right there where the little house was in the corner of the field. Well, lined up, and it come time for Campbellsville to punt, and Dean was the punter. Well, he punted, and our team went down the field, and Chapel Hill went this way because he kicked it back over his head.
I could say that was my first time to front.
Last time we had a football team,
Huh?
was early 50s, about the last time they They quit having a football team.
Well, the last game that we played was in Elton. And the halftime score was 7-7, the end of the score was 32-7 in favor of Campbellsville. And that was our wind up with them.
We wasn't gas rations there, we didn't play basketball there for a few years.
Probation?
Gas was rationed.
We was on probation too, one time. Because Mr. Odell Urfrey went out with a knife, gonna kill the referee. That's over Cox's Bridge.
Several years ago, we were in the Duck River Valley Conference, along with all those small schools. And John Majors and I were going to make a tour of all those places that we played football in. But we got to Giles County, and he said, there's two things that I want to see in Giles County. One, I want to see where I played football, in the hayfield. He said, I played football all my life, and I never played in a hayfield except in Campbellsville.
And who are you talking about? I'm sorry.
Johnny Maynard.
Yeah, Daddy told me that. Yeah. Yeah.
And the second thing he wanted to see was Coach Marlon Goodman from Bowling.
Oh.
Steve that we went to Gillespie, Pat Callahan located him. He was down at the stock barn cutting cattle. So he comes out, he's all wet and sweat, and John Majors walked right up to him and shook his hand and said, I'm Coach John Majors. And Coach Goodman, I'll never forget this. He just looked at him and said, so what?
Did he come out here? Did you show him the field where he played him?
There's down dry creek.
Yeah, that's what Daddy said.
Yeah.
Well, they played up on Playground. I think we were sophomores that year. Johnny was like a freshman. Anyway,
He said he was an 8th grader. They
Council.
didn't play on the senior team.
we beat like 25-0. And somebody said, Johnny, what happened to you? You couldn't run too good today. He said, I couldn't get across that damn corn road.
Hey, does anybody know, do any of y'all know if they tried to have a football team before they moved the school over here? Tommy Zuccarello told me a story about shortly after the school, moved over here. I'm not sure exactly when it was, but it moved up here in 1924. And Felix Zuccarello was named the athletic director. I'm sure most of y'all remember Felix. And Tommy told me that, I don't know if it was the first football game they had with Felix as the athletic director, but he said they got beat 100 and something to nothing. Now, I suppose that was true. Have y'all ever heard anything like that?
Yeah, but now that wasn't really out of the ordinary as much as you think. They would cause a series of plays. And as soon as they played one, they lined up and won again. Do you know about that, Sam? Is he gone?
He's gone.
See, Vanderbilt and them would run scores up like that. They ran a lot more plays. They'd line up and they'd huddle, and then they'd run maybe a half a dozen plays before they'd huddle again. Just as soon as the play was made, they'd line up and go again. So you could win a lot or lose a lot.
Tommy also told me what I thought was kind of an amusing story about the new school. You remember that basement room that was down under the north end of the school that was I guess it was under what I had as the first grade room. He said the furnace was supposed to go in there. They built that to put a furnace in, and when they went to get it, it wouldn't fit in there. So they had to put heaters in the room instead of the furnace in the basement.
Well, what I've always heard, the man that was building the school went bankrupt. Now, that's what I've always heard. That's why they didn't ever get the furnace. People go broke now just like they did then, or then like they do now, but that's an interesting thing there. When I played football, our science class with James Clark was our teacher and also the coach. We dug a septic tank below the bottom of that and benched it off. We would dig down 6 feet and then, with a big hole, then we'd drop in 2 feet all the way around and dig 6 more feet. We dug 12 or 13 feet deep right up there, and that tank, I'm sure, is still in there. If I'd say somebody ought to go dig that up. That really be
Exercise.
I have a question for Ms. Hamlet. You mentioned basketball. Did you play basketball?
Little, not much.
Okay. Well, I know that with the women, basketball and cheerleading were kind of the things y'all got to participate in, because that's what I always heard. My Aunt Jean was a cheerleader and a basketball player. Mama was a basketball player. But what about, were there other activities that were sort of female related? I mean, community ride or school, or I mean, what are some things that as women you were able to participate in, or you remember your mother doing? Was there a home demonstration club back then, and the ladies came out and taught canning and things? And is that kind of the time period, or can you talk a little bit about that part? Being a female during that time.
4-H, I remember 4-H, but I don't remember home economics, we had all that, but I don't remember.
They had home economics. When did you get that?
Yeah.
Well, I was in those.
Yeah.
No, I wasn't.
But right here was the champion basketball players right here.
She was good. Christine Mars was a good player.
Then
I
did y'all go
started playing basketball when I was in 7th grade, I think.
Oh, okay.
And I played all until I finished, 41. But we didn't have much activities, you know, beside that. We didn't play basketball, you know. So they did have home economics in school. But other than that, there was no, and of course the boys played baseball and football. And we'd go on so-called field trips sometimes.